April 17th, 1961, 2 in the morning. Bay of Pigs, southern coast of Cuba. José Pérez San Román stands in a landing craft approaching the dark beach, listening to diesel engines rumble and waves slap against the hull. Around him are 1,400 Cuban exiles, armed with American weapons, trained by American instructors, promised American air support that he's starting to doubt will actually come. They're invading their own country to overthrow Fidel Castro, backed by the CIA, approved by President Kennedy. And Perez has a terrible feeling that something is already going wrong. The landing craft hits sand. The rev drops. Men pour onto the beach, expecting to find it empty. Instead, they find militia waiting in the darkness. Gunfire erupts immediately. Tracers light up the night. Men are falling before they even reach dry ground. Perez screams orders that nobody can hear over the gunfire. His radio operator is hit. Blood spreading across his chest. The radio smashes on the rocks. There goes communication with the ships offshore. The plan is already falling apart, and they've been on Cuban soil for 30 seconds. Behind them in the landing ships, ammunition is stacked wrong. Fuel drums are blocking access to weapons crates. Someone miscalculated the tides, and 2 ships are stuck on coral reefs. American advisors who were supposed to guide the landing stayed on their ships, offshore because they're not supposed to be here officially. Perez looks back at the chaos, looks forward at the militia positions firing down on his men from the hills, realizes with sinking certainty that this invasion is a disaster and it's only going to get worse. This is the Bay of Pigs. 3 days in April 1961, when 1,400 Cuban exiles tried to invade Cuba and liberate it from Castro's communist government. When the CIA promised support that never materialized. When President Kennedy approved an operation, then withdrew crucial air cover at the last moment. When everything that could go wrong did go wrong. When an invasion planned by the best intelligence agency in the world failed so spectacularly that it strengthened Castro, embarrassed America, and nearly triggered nuclear war, the plan starts 2 years earlier when Fidel Castro seizes power in Cuba on New Year's Day 1959, overthrowing the Batista dictatorship. Initially, Castro isn't communist. He promises democracy and land reform. But his government quickly radicalizes, nationalizes American businesses, executes Batista supporters, arrests political opponents, moves closer to the Soviet Union. The Eisenhower administration watches Cuba's revolution with growing alarm. Communist government 90 miles from Florida is unacceptable during the Cold War. The domino theory says if Cuba falls to communism, then all of Latin America might follow. The CIA under Director Allen Dulles proposes a solution. Recruit Cuban exiles who fled Castro's government. Train them as invasion force, land them on Cuban beach. Spark popular uprising against Castro. The Cuban people will rise up to support the invaders. Castro's government will collapse. Democracy will be restored. Problem solved. The plan is modeled on the CIA as 1954 Guatemala operation, where a small exile force backed by air support overthrew President Jacobo Arbenz. That worked perfectly. Why wouldn't Cuba work the same way? But Guatemala and Cuba are completely different situations. Arbenz was unpopular, and his military didn't fight for him. Castro is popular, especially among peasants who received land in the revolution. His military is loyal and battle-hardened from fighting Batista's forces. The geography is different. The political situation is different. But the CIA planners are confident. They've done this before. They know how to overthrow governments. Recruitment begins in Miami, where thousands of Cuban exiles are desperate to return home and overthrow Castro. They're not hard to find. The CIA sets up front companies, spreads word that a liberation force is forming. Volunteers flood in. Doctors and lawyers and students. who fled Cuba when Castro started arresting the middle class, plus former Batista soldiers who know how to fight. The recruits are sent to training camps in Guatemala, told they're joining Brigade 2506, named after the serial number of recruit who died during training. The brigade trains for amphibious assault, guerrilla warfare, air operations. The training is hard. American instructors from the CIA and military drill the exiles in weapons and tactics. The Cubans are motivated, but most aren't professional soldiers. They're civilians who want their country back. They believe the CIA promises that American air support will destroy Castro's planes and tanks, that American Navy will cover the landing, that the Cuban people will rise up once they hear the invasion started. They trust the Americans because what choice do they have? Meanwhile, the CIA is planning the operation in detail. They need landing site that's close to population centers where uprising can spread, but also defensible if things go wrong. They choose the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. It has good beaches, nearby airstrip, access to the Escambray Mountains where guerrillas can retreat if the landing fails. The plan calls for airstrikes to destroy Castro's air force before the landing, amphibious assault at night. Capture the airstrip, establish beachhead. Wait for popular uprising that will sweep Castro from power. In November 1960. Eisenhower approves the plan, gives the CIA authority to proceed. But Eisenhower leaves office in January 1961 before the invasion happens. The plan passes to the new Kennedy administration. President Kennedy is young and inexperienced in foreign policy. He's skeptical about the invasion, but the CIA assures him it will work. They tell him Castro is weak. The Cuban people hate him. One push and the government will collapse. Kennedy wants to look tough on communism. Doesn't want to be blamed if Castro consolidates power. He approves the operation with modifications. Kennedy's modifications make the plan worse. He worries about American involvement being too obvious, orders the airstrikes reduced, doesn't want unmarked American planes bombing Cuba because that's too blatant, insists the operation look like purely Cuban effort, no visible American support. The CIA planners are concerned, but they adjust. Fewer airstrikes. The exile pilots will fly from Nicaragua instead of American bases. The landing will happen at night to reduce visibility. It will still work. It has to work. April 15, 1961. 2 days before the invasion, 8 B-26 bombers flown by Cuban exile pilots attack Cuban airfields. They're supposed to destroy Castro's air force on the ground. The raids hit some planes, but miss most of them. Castro's air force survives mostly intact. This is the first failure, but nobody realizes how critical it is yet. One of the B-26s lands in Florida, pretending to be defector. The pilot claims he's from Castro's air force and just bombed his own bases before escaping. This cover story is supposed to hide American involvement, but journalists quickly prove it's fake. The plane is clearly from the CIA. The story collapses. Kennedy is furious about the botched cover story. The world knows Americans are behind the attack. The element of surprise is gone. He orders the second wave of airstrikes canceled, the ones planned for the morning of the invasion. The strikes that would have destroyed Castro's remaining planes. The CIA begs him to reconsider. Those airstrikes are essential. The invasion will fail without air superiority. Kennedy refuses. Too much risk of exposing American involvement. The political cost is too high. The CIA has to tell the brigade commanders that the air support is canceled. Perez and the other leaders are shocked. How can they invade without air cover? Castro's planes will destroy them on the beaches. This is suicide, but the CIA says proceed anyway. Kennedy might change his mind once the invasion starts. The exile leaders reluctantly agree because they've come too far to turn back. Their men are already loaded on the ships. Heading for Cuba, April 17, 1961. Midnight, the invasion fleet reaches the Bay of Pigs. The ships are old freighters chartered by the CIA, loaded with ammunition and supplies, and 1,400 Cuban exiles who haven't slept in days. They're nervous and excited. This is the moment they've trained for, going home to liberate their country. The ships anchor offshore. Landing craft are lowered. Men climb down cargo nets in the darkness. Engines start. The boats head for the beach dot. The plan calls for 2 landing sites. The main force at Playa Girón, a smaller force at Playa Larga, 15 miles to the west. Both beaches are supposed to be lightly defended. Quick capture of the beachhead. Then advance inland to the airstrip. But the intelligence is wrong. Castro has militia units all over this area. The Bay of Pigs isn't isolated. There are villages nearby with telephones. Militia can call for reinforcements immediately. The landing at Playa Girón starts badly when coral reefs tear the bottom out of 2 landing craft. Men have to wade ashore in chest-deep water. Their radios get soaked and stop working. Communication breaks down immediately. The militia opens fire from positions on the hills overlooking the beach. The exiles return fire, but they're pinned down, can't advance off the beach. More landing craft are trying to come in, but the damaged boats are blocking the approach. It's chaos in the darkness. P.E. Acute REZ is trying to organize his men. Get them off the beach and into cover. Establish some kind of defensive line. But he can't communicate with the ships offshore, can't call for fire support, can't coordinate with the other landing at Playa Larga. He's fighting blind. His men are brave but confused. They're taking casualties and haven't even secured the beachhead yet. Dawn is coming in a few hours, and when Castro's planes arrive without American air cover to stop them, everyone on this beach is going to die. At Playa Larga, the landing goes slightly better. The exile force secures the beach and starts advancing inland. But militia is converging from all directions. Castro's commanders realize this is invasion, not raid. They're mobilizing every available unit. Thousands of militia and regular army troops are heading toward the Bay of Pigs. The exile forces total 1,400 men. Castro is sending 20,000. The math doesn't work. Dawn breaks on April 17th. Castro's planes appear. Old propeller-driven fighters and trainers, armed with rockets and machine guns. Not modern jets, but effective against ships and men on beaches. The exile forces have no anti-aircraft weapons worth mentioning. No air cover, they're completely vulnerable. The Cuban planes attack the supply ships offshore. Rockets slam into the Houston. It's carrying ammunition and fuel. The explosions are massive. The ship is sinking. Men jump into the water. The Rio Escondido takes a direct hit, explodes in fireball that lights up the morning. 2 supply ships gone in the first hour of daylight. The remaining ships panic and retreat out of range. They're civilian freighters, not warships. The captains won't sacrifice their ships. They head for international waters, taking most of the invasion supplies with them. Ammunition, fuel, communications equipment, medical supplies. All of it sailing away, while the men on the beach are running low on everything. Perez watches the ships leave, realizes they're abandoned. Nobody is coming to help. They're on their own against Castro's entire military. The fighting through April 17th is desperate. The exile forces hold the beachhead, but barely. Militia attacks from all directions. The exiles are better trained, but outnumbered 10-1. Ammunition is running low. No resupply possible with the ships gone. Wounded men are bleeding out because medical supplies are limited. The airstrip they were supposed to capture is held by Castro's forces in strength. The whole plan is collapsing. Kennedy is in the White House receiving updates. Realizes the invasion is failing. Debates whether to send American air support after all. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are begging him to intervene. Send jets from carriers offshore. Provide air cover. Save the invasion. Kennedy refuses. He approved a covert operation, not an American invasion of Cuba. Sending U.S. military jets is act of war. The political cost is too high. He won't do it. The exile force will have to survive or die on their own. The CIA is in crisis mode. They're trying to organize supply drops by air. Sending C-46 and C-54 transport planes loaded with ammunition. The planes fly from Nicaragua without fighter escort because Kennedy won't allow American jets to participate. Castro's fighters intercept the transports. Slow cargo planes are easy targets. Several are shot down. The pilots who survive turn back. Almost none of the supplies reach the men on the beach. Night falls on April 17th. The exile forces have held the beachhead for almost 24 hours, but they're exhausted, running out of ammunition. Taking steady casualties, no hope of reinforcement. No air support, no resupply, surrounded by thousands of Castro's troops who are getting stronger while the exiles get weaker. Pérez knows they can't hold another day. He's trying to decide whether to retreat into the Escambray Mountains as guerrillas or make last stand on the beach. Both options are terrible. April 18th. The second day, Castro's forces attack with tanks. The exiles have bazookas but limited ammunition. They knock out some tanks, but more keep coming. The beachhead shrinks as the exiles fall back under pressure. The perimeter is collapsing. Men are fighting hand-to-hand in places. Ammunition is so low that some positions have only grenades left. The wounded are lying in the sand with minimal medical care. The situation is hopeless. Kennedy authorizes one last attempt to help, allows American jets from the carrier Essex to provide air cover for exactly 1 hour. From 6 to 7 a.m. on April 19th, 1 hour to cover a supply drop and give the exiles a chance to retreat. It's too little too late, but it's something. The jets arrive at dawn on April 19th. Navy A-4 Skyhawks flying over the battlefield. They're not allowed to engage Castro's forces directly, just protect the supply planes. The hour of air cover achieves almost nothing because there are barely any supply planes left to protect. The exile force is disintegrating. On April 19th, some men try to retreat to the mountains, but Castro's troops are blocking the routes. Others surrender because they're out of ammunition and surrounded. Small groups try to escape into the swamps, but most are hunted down by militia who know the terrain. Pérez and about 200 men make last stand at Playa Girón. They fight until their ammunition runs completely out, then surrender because dying for nothing accomplishes nothing. The invasion is over in 3 days. Total failure. 114 exile soldiers killed. Over 1,200 captured, including Pérez, who will spend the next 20 months in Castro's prisons. Only about 150 men escape back to Florida. The entire operation is disaster from start to finish. Nothing went according to plan. Every assumption proved wrong. The promised air support never came. The popular uprising never happened. The Cuban people didn't rise up against Castro because most of them support Castro, or at least don't hate him enough to risk dying for the invasion. The prisoners are paraded on Cuban television. Castro personally interrogates some of them. The propaganda value is enormous. Castro proves that Cuba can defeat American-backed invasion. His government is strengthened, not weakened. The revolution is validated. Castro's popularity soars. He uses the invasion to justify closer ties to the Soviet Union. Within months, Cuba is receiving Soviet weapons and advisors. The Bay of Pigs pushes Castro toward the Soviets when he might have stayed neutral. Kennedy takes full responsibility publicly, addresses the nation, admits the invasion failed, doesn't blame the CIA or the exiles, takes the political hit. His approval rating actually goes up because Americans respect a leader who admits mistakes. But privately, Kennedy is furious at the CIA for promising success and delivering disaster. He fires Allen Dulles and other CIA leaders involved in planning. Vows never to trust the intelligence community again without verification. The postmortem on why the invasion failed produces hundreds of pages of analysis. The reasons are obvious in hindsight. The plan assumed popular uprising that never materialized. Assumed air superiority that Kennedy's cancellation of strikes prevented. Assumed Castro's military was weak when actually it was motivated and effective. Assumed the CIA's Guatemala success could be repeated when Cuba was a completely different situation. The entire operation was based on wishful thinking and bad assumptions. The brigade, 2,506 prisoners, spent 20 months in Cuban prisons, interrogated, used for propaganda. Some are tried and sentenced to long prison terms. They're bargaining chips now. Castro offers to release them in exchange for tractors and medical supplies. The negotiations drag on for over a year. Finally, in December 1962, the prisoners are released in exchange for $53 million worth of food and medicine. They return to Miami as heroes to the exile community, but defeated men who lost the war to liberate their homeland. Perez and the other brigade leaders never forgive Kennedy for canceling the airstrikes. They believe they could have won with proper air support, that Kennedy betrayed them by approving the invasion and withdrawing crucial support. Kennedy's defenders argue the operation was doomed from the start, that airstrikes wouldn't have changed the fundamental problems of poor intelligence and no popular uprising. The debate continues for decades. Nobody agrees who's most to blame. The Bay of Pigs has enormous consequences beyond the immediate failure. It convinces Castro that Cuba needs Soviet protection against future American attacks. Leads directly to the Cuban Missile Crisis 18 months later, when Soviets put nuclear missiles on Cuba. Kennedy's handling of that crisis is partly shaped by his Bay of Pigs experience. He's more skeptical of military advice, more careful about escalation. The missile crisis brings the world to brink of nuclear war, but ends peacefully. Partly because Kennedy learned from the Bay of Pigs disaster. The invasion also affects American foreign policy for the rest of the Cold War. The CIA becomes more cautious about covert operations. Kennedy creates the XCOM system of getting multiple perspectives before making decisions instead of relying on one agency's advice. The military and intelligence community's credibility is damaged. The Bay of Pigs becomes shorthand for overconfident planning and wishful thinking. Every subsequent military operation is analyzed for Bay of Pigs mistakes. For Cuba, the Bay of Pigs is validation of the revolution, proof that Cuba can stand up to American imperialism. Castro uses it to justify everything from political repression to alliance with Soviets. The invasion strengthens his government rather than weakening it. Exactly the opposite of what the CIA intended. The operation achieves negative progress, makes the situation worse than if nothing had been attempted. The surviving members of Brigade 2,506 settle in Miami, become community leaders in Cuban exile circles, maintain hope of returning to free Cuba someday. Some participate in later CIA operations against Castro. The brigade holds annual reunions where old men tell stories about the 3 days they fought on Cuban beaches. Younger generations listen, but can't fully understand what it felt like to invade your own country and lose. Castro stays in power until 2008, when illness forces him to hand control to his brother Raul. He dies in 2016 at age 90, outliving most of the men who invaded at the Bay of Pigs. Outlasting Kennedy and 9 other American presidents, the revolution he led survives him. Cuba remains communist decades after the Soviet Union collapsed. The Bay of Pigs invasion that was supposed to end Castro's government instead helped ensure its survival. The lessons from the Bay of Pigs are taught at military academies and intelligence schools. Case study in how not to plan operations. The importance of realistic assumptions. The danger of groupthink. The necessity of questioning authority, the consequences of inadequate intelligence. Every failed operation gets compared to Bay of Pigs. It's the gold standard of disasters. Remember the Bay of Pigs, not just as failed invasion, but as human tragedy. 1,400 men who wanted to free their country from dictatorship, who trusted American promises of support that weren't kept, who fought bravely against impossible odds, who died or were captured in operation that was doomed from the start. Remember that intelligence failures have real consequences, measured in lives, not just abstract strategic setbacks. Remember that overconfidence and wishful thinking can produce disasters, no matter how sophisticated the planning. That the CIA's best analysts and Kennedy's advisors, all convinced themselves an operation would work despite warning signs. That groupthink and institutional momentum can override common sense. That sometimes the experts are catastrophically wrong. Remember, the men in Castro's prisons for 20 months after the invasion. Brigade 2,506 members who fought for their country and lost, who returned to Miami as defeated men rather than liberators, who lived the rest of their lives in exile because their attempt to go home failed. Remember that behind every failed military operation are individual people whose lives are destroyed by strategic mistakes. This is the Bay of Pigs. April 17th to 19th, 1961. 3 days when 1,400 Cuban exiles invaded their homeland and lost, when American promises of air support weren't kept, when perfect plan met reality and collapsed, when disaster that could have been prevented by better intelligence or honest assessment instead became one of the Cold War's most infamous failures.